Just a prime example. Back in 22, to order a fire mission would take up to an hour, hour and a half. Now, if you're advancing, depending on where you're advancing, but you may be able to handle an hour delay while you're waiting for a fire mission because every general up there wants to sign off on it.
Yeah.
Now it's 5 minutes. It's been absolutely reorganized because it doesn't. But when you're on the defense, the enemy's attacking. You don't have an hour to wait. The battle's over and they've gone by you and say bye-bye. And that's another thing that happened in the Kharkov because our friends of our friends, they lost their oldest son. He was a gunner in a BMP-3. Well, he was a BMP-2 when he got killed. They ran over a mine that was placed either by drone or by it was a German mine on a railroad that they'd used several times on a static front. But he, good kid, extremely bright kid. Quit university, volunteered. Everybody loved him. He got a lot of guys, helped get a lot of guys out of Kharkov because they got encircled. But he was in a built-up position. The Ukrainians, when they came out into the Kharkov offensive, they lost a huge portion of their army because they had this iron fist that they had collected up, tanks, heavy equipment, but they were hiding them in basements, parking lots, underneath high-story buildings, knowing that Russia isn't going to Gaza Kharkov. If it was Israelis, it'd all be over. But Russia isn't going to destroy hundreds of thousands of civilians. So they kept it there, but, you couldn't hit it. Well, when they did their Kharkov offensive, so these Russian strong points were sometimes 3 to 5 kilometers between each other. I mean, just gaping holes, right? And it was obvious enough that if they pushed, they were going to go through. So what they did was the Ukrainians used flying columns. The same thing they did in Kursk, which are great as long as there's not a static front all of a sudden, because then that flying column just becomes meat. And what happened when they finally started really trying to get up toward the atomic power plants, there was already a front built up, and those columns just run right into ambushes and got wiped out because they've got nothing but light vehicles. So they're fast moving, but they can't take any built up place. So they get bypassed by these these flying brigades, and the flying columns will get in the rear, and they'd start causing havoc on supply, things like that, communications. But they couldn't take the built-up places like where he was at. And that's when the Ukrainians pulled out the heavy equipment out of Kharkov and started assaulting those heavy positions. They still never took a single one because they were being pulled back fast enough that they couldn't overrun them. But when they actually came out, they came out right underneath the Russian air umbrella, artillery umbrella, and they lost most of that fist. By the time they punched through Krasny Limon and up to where the lines finally stabilized, they had lost most of their fighting power up there, because they came out of that hiding area. But those areas, and they couldn't call fire enough because it was taking up to an hour to get a fire mission in. Well, the enemy's gone by that point. Well, that's been reorganized. I mean, it's 5-10 minutes max between, by the time it's 10 minutes to get an Iskandar fired onto a target. Artillery comes even faster. I mean, that's a total reorganization. They cut out the top brass. They assigned batteries to whatever mission. You've got artillery support. Everything's gone speed. I mean, that's a total reorganization right there.
Yeah, and that's what I think so many, especially a lot of these NATO, former NATO generals, Ben Hodges, David Petraeus, and I had worked with them. Again, I was scripting these counterterrorism exercises over 23 years, and I worked with UCOM, CENTCOM, PACOM, AFRICOM. I did all the comms, and the point you're making that I think is so important is that through your own experience. So when you come in as a second lieutenant, and then you're being mentored by a captain, and then once you go through second, first lieutenant, then you get promotable to captain, where you're being mentored by a major, and that major is being mentored by a lieutenant colonel, and that lieutenant colonel is being mentored by a colonel. So you're always drawing on. You're ideally working with experienced people. And the unspoken in that is you've always got some senior NCOs who actually know what the hell's going on, keep you from getting killed. Well, that, the United States has not really had that ability to transfer that kind of knowledge, because all we've been fighting were goat herders carrying AKs, no artillery. I know from my old boss at the State Department was a retired Marine colonel who did 2 tours in Vietnam. And, when he talked about a quick reaction force in Vietnam, that meant, you had an artillery unit that had your position zeroed. You had actually a full company that was capable of responding through helicopters. And you had a whole host of fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft that could bring fires in. Now, that was a quick reaction force. Jump ahead to, 2003, 2004 in Afghanistan. And they sent that one crew of Navy SEALs out, 4 guys, and they got ambushed. And the quick reaction force was basically 20 guys on a helicopter, and they didn't have any support from So when I started doing exercises, I thought, we're going to learn lessons learned from past experience. Bullshit. There was no lessons learned. There was a lot of forgetting going on. It seems though the Russians are doing the exact opposite right now, and that's what I think the West is missing.
Russia always has this tendency, if you look historically, Russia always has a tendency of starting out slow, but with a very high learning curve. And that happened in World War II, in the Great Patriotic War. It's interesting enough, the Germans learned blitzkrieg from Soviet tacticians. But the Germans being the Germans and understanding Stalin's slight paranoia problem, the Gestapo prepared dossiers on a lot of generals who they wanted removed. And that they were going to overthrow Stalin back in the mid-30s. And Stalin pushed him. And that got rid of a lot of very experienced officers. Yeah. But at the beginning of the war, this is an interesting statistic I read once. At the very beginning of the war, there was 5 Russian soldiers dying for every German soldier. There were 3 Americans and British and French dying for every German soldier. And the reason wasn't because Germans were some kind of super soldiers, is because of the level of aptitude of the officers and NCOs. Flip that to 44, 45, because, in the U.S., it's, the Russians just buried them in corpses. Yeah. Well, no. You go to Königsberg. Königsberg is a perfect example. Built as a fortress from the very beginning. Fortified. Hitler dropped 120,000 garrison in there. It's going to hold the Red Army up for 6 months. It lasted 2 weeks, and the Germans took more casualties than the Russian army assaulting a super fortress city. And that's unheard of if you think about it. I mean, you're on the defensive, and you're losing more men in an urban, in a built-up, heavily built-up, fortified urban environment than the enemy assaulting. That's insane. But that was the difference between. By now, you've got the Russian or the Soviet officers and NCOs are so experienced, versus the Germans that have lost all that experience. They're not just pushing whomever they can up into the officer ranks, because everybody else is dead. That's, by the way, also what we're seeing in Ukraine now, because the big minus in the Russian military, and it's still a minus, is Russia does not have a professional NCO corps. We're trying to push that through. Me and a few people in the know, we're trying to push that through in military, in the defense ministry, to set something up like that, at least have a test case. Well, the Ukrainians actually did do that. NATO set up and trained a professional NCO corps. So that allowed them to react a lot faster than they should have been able to react back in 22. Because the NCOs, you didn't have to have officers. The NCOs, the NCO can do. An experienced NCO, that may be worse than having an officer in charge. And they were able to remobilize themselves and react. Granted, most of those guys are now dead, have run off, or are invalids. So they're having problems because their NCO corps is now lower class. Their officer corps is pretty lower class because, all the other guys, the experienced guys are mostly dead or getting themselves as far in the rear as they can to stay alive. And the Russian military is on the other hand. The officers are professional. They've got the experience that they didn't have before. And the sergeants, they're not professional sergeants, but they're experienced.
Yeah, yeah.
But you still need a professional NCO corps. I mean, you know that. That's just a matter of getting that through the bureaucracy.
By then, I think we're going to have some important military developments to discuss. I don't know.
Oh, definitely.
I don't think Ukraine can hang on for much longer. At some point, it breaks.
Well, here's the problem with that. Well, first of all, as they say, it's all over but the dying.
Yeah.
And there's still going to be a lot of dying. I mean, on the defensive, you can still hold to a degree. The problem is a lot of people, they think, oh, well, once the Russian army gets to the Dnieper, it's over.
Yeah, no.
Why?
Yeah.
No. Because the Dnieper is so wide, you can't shoot artillery across it. I get asked on Russian television, hey, how far are we going to go? When is it going to end? Like, I don't know, London, Paris.
Yeah.
There's no stop. No, think about it. We do a buffer zone in Kharkov. The people living in that buffer zone, who do they become? They become Russian citizens.
Yeah.
They're getting artillery attacked or terrorist attacked by drones from further down Kharkov Oblast or from Poltava Oblast. What Russia has to do? Russia has to defend them. That means you have to stretch the front forward. Now, the people in those areas, who do they become? They become Russian citizens. They're being artillery attacked or they're being hit. What do? You go further and you keep going until you reach somebody that doesn't want to shoot.
Yeah.
Whether it's the Dnieper, whether that's Kiev, whether it's Lvov, whether that's Warsaw, Berlin, I don't know. Hopefully you don't have to go that far. Hopefully sanity reigns supreme, but
one of the things that may happen, and it'll be we'll close out on this. The West is due for a major financial crisis. With a financial crisis and no longer ability to fund this madness in Ukraine, that might bring it to an end. But
you notice, by the way, the Poles have started getting nervous.
Yes.
The Poles didn't come to Washington. They're now starting a pissing match with Zelensky over Bandera. But what they're really getting nervous is that the Germans are planning a 500,000 man army at the minimum. Rheinmetall is now building tanks again. They put 8 tanks together out of brand new tanks together last year, and they're doing it. They're upping their production, and they're also building a new plant by 26. By the end of 26 to produce 60,000 rounds of 155 per month. Well, whenever the Germans militarize, that's never good for a Pole.
Yeah,
it never ends well.
Yeah.